On behalf of the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, thank you for joining us today for the kickoff to our future-driven webinar series. This is just a part of our efforts to provide you with a snapshot of what's ahead on the horizon, what's driving the industry, and the direction in which we're heading. But first, a step back, how we got to this point, how the Alliance for Automotive Innovation became the voice of an entire industry.
How, on a hilltop, were 10-ton blocks fitted to under a millimeter? How did roads hold together an empire? How did we cross this in these? Make this and this? Fly these? Golf here? How? Often measured risk brought both setbacks and successes, but always, always there was imagination fused with cooperation. And starting today, for all of you seeking a way forward in personal transportation, there's a single unified voice. You visionaries and realists, manufacturers and suppliers, advocates for safety and commerce, movers and shakers all. What brings you together is not just a vision for a future that's safe, clean, and efficient, but a dedication to the steps that will get us there. Introducing the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. Innovators transforming personal mobility.
We'll turn to today's discussion momentarily, but first, we'd like to have a word from our association's current board chairman. Mark Royce has spent his entire career at General Motors, working his way up to his current position as president. In this role, he's leading General Motors' transformation of a global product development workforce and its processes to drive world-class levels of engineering and advanced technologies. All of this to further improve product quality and speed to market. Royce is also doubling the resources allocated to electric and autonomous vehicle programs in the next 2 years. Here is Mark Royce, president of General Motors, the company that currently chairs our board of directors.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm happy to be part of the webinar series that Auto Innovators is launching today. As we all know, 2020 has been unlike any other year, with unprecedented challenges to our industry and to our world. The launch of our association in January was well-timed to help convene the industry around a common set of principles, and then to work together towards those goals in Washington, D.C. and across the country. Without question, the challenges we have faced due to COVID-19 underscore the importance of having one unified industry voice. We should all be very proud of how our industry stepped up to produce critical personal protection equipment for the first responders and healthcare workers, and also ventilators, which were in short supply at the outset of the pandemic. The same goes for how the industry worked to safely and effectively restart auto production after a complete shutdown in North America that spanned 8 weeks, the longest period of idled auto manufacturing since World War II. Throughout these challenging times, I think we all have been reminded about how important personal transportation can really be. And in many cases, the increasingly efficient cars and trucks that so many of us rely on every day have become mobile offices and distance learning hubs, thanks to the expanded functionality of in-vehicle Wi-Fi hotspots and other technology and safety features. Although my year as the first chairman of Auto Innovators is ending, I have enjoyed the sharing of key insights and the interactions among the member companies, all committed to the future of our industry. And without question, I know that Auto Innovators will continue working to help realize our shared vision for a cleaner, safer, and smarter future. I'm really excited that Chris Reynolds from Toyota will be taking over as board chairman in a few weeks, and I'm looking forward to his remarks at the end of the event today. So in closing, the fact that you've joined today's discussion is an indication of how important the auto sector is to our nation's economy, our workforce, and our daily lives. As I turn things back to John Bozzella for the panel discussion, I want to personally thank each of our industry experts on that panel for their participation. I know this kickoff event will spur additional conversations, both inside and outside Auto Innovators. and I look forward to seeing you at upcoming future-driven webinar events. So thank you again for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Mark, for your comments and for your leadership. And welcome all to this future-driven discussion on the auto industry landscape. My name's John Bozzella. I'm the president and CEO of the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. As noted in the video, Auto Innovators launched less than a year ago to be the singular, clear, and authoritative voice for the auto industry, working with policymakers to find and seize the shared vision of a cleaner, smarter, safer future for personal transportation. We're pleased to be working with 37 member companies across the sector, from auto manufacturers to suppliers, tech companies to new entrants to the mobility space, all helping to realize this cleaner, smarter, safer future. As the Biden administration and a new Congress get set to go to work, today's discussion will examine the auto industry landscape broadly, the consumers and the innovators, as well as the macro view at a transformational moment. And now I'd like to turn to our panelists, three of the most in-the-know experts in their fields today. To give us a perspective on industry fundamentals and economics, we have Carla Bailo. Carla is the president and CEO of the Center for Automotive Research, a major source of objective insight and industry research. Carla has 35 years of automotive experience in the corporate sector and academia. A mechanical engineer by training, she also recently served as vice president of automotive for SAE International, which represents nearly 140,000 technical engineers globally. Michelle Krebs will be providing us with a view of the customer and the US auto market. As Autotrader's executive analyst, Michelle has unique perspective on the state of the industry, and her roots run deep. She's not only an award-winning automotive writer, she was the first female car reviewer for the New York Times and the first woman to participate in the selection of Motor Trend's Car and Truck of the Year. And our political and macro point of view comes courtesy of Chris Krueger of Cowen and Associates. Chris has been a Washington strategist there since 2016 and has held similar positions at Guggenheim Securities and MF Global. Chris's Washington Research Note is a must-read for DC insiders. I'd like to welcome all of our panelists. Thanks for being here today. So let me start in light of yesterday's major step forward with vaccinations with COVID-19. We heard Mark talk about the industry and the challenges faced by the industry at the very beginning of the pandemic. Some might argue that if we look at sales today, the industry has come back fairly strongly. So let me start with you, Michelle. Take us back to those early days of the pandemic, late March into April. What was happening with regard to sales, and really how did we get back to a relatively strong auto market today?
Well, it's interesting, John. Thanks for having me, by the way. It was surreal. It reminded me of the start of the Great Recession and that kind of surrealness. We didn't know what was going to happen. And then the lockdowns happened in the various states and dealerships were locked down and we closed plants all over the world and we weren't sure when they were coming back up. But we were monitoring early things that were happening and you could see things were starting to bottom out end of March, early April, and then sales started coming back up. I guess if I look back, it was remarkable, the recovery. We saw resourcefulness, resilience of everybody, the manufacturers, the suppliers, the consumer, and the dealers. And it's caused changes that we aren't going back to the way things were before.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about that, Michelle. When you say there are changes we might not go, changes in the industry perhaps, or use patterns, behavior, give us a little bit of a sense of what that means.
Well, there's good and bad of this. So what we saw is for years, we've been surveying consumers and they say, I want to do more of the sales online. I want, pick up and delivery. Well, the lockdowns happened, and that's the only way many dealers could sell cars. And you know what? Consumers like it. We've done surveys about consumer satisfaction. They want more of it. And dealers are getting on board that this is the way it's going to be. Now, on the downside, one of the things that happened is millions of people lost their jobs, and we've really created this bifurcated market of people who had money, kept their jobs, could work from home, were buying cars, and that were very expensive ones, SUVs and pickup trucks. There are millions of people who are out of the new car market. On the plus side, there is a very strong used car market, and that came back even faster than new cars.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. I want to come back to that market in a second, and also maybe take a broader look at the economy in general with Chris as well. But Carla, Michelle's talking about the demand side. Help us understand what the production side of things looked like. The whole supply chain not only stopping, but it's a very complicated machine, this auto production system. How did it restart? A complicated global supply chain and regional supply. How did we get it back going again?
Well, it's funny. I don't think people sometimes realize how complex the manufacturing process is. I recall we hired a person from NASA, and he went into the manufacturing plant and said, "Oh my gosh, it's as complicated as building a spaceship." But, fortunately, we did see what happened overseas. We saw what happened in China. So we saw how everything shut down and then things began to reopen. So many of the suppliers and companies that had office space there and had manufacturing facilities there had a little bit of help in that regard. But from the very beginning, from the very first day of shutdown, teams were put in place at every OEM, at every supplier that were monitoring on a daily basis what was happening with supply chain, what it looked like when they got the green light to open again. Were they going to be able to continue? Did they need to resource? It was a crisis activity in every company. Those same crisis teams, by the way, are the teams that actually did the PPE work too and made sure that those parts got gathered up and given and distributed properly to all the different hospitals and states that needed that equipment. But clearly they began in the very beginning to start to assess. And, it was obvious that a lot of the just-in-time suppliers needed to start at least a week ahead of time, and that there needed to be a slow ramp up, because not only did you have the supply chain issues, but you had new restrictions within the plant. People couldn't come in, as they used to in large numbers. It had to be sequential. So opening, closing took a lot longer. People getting to their stations, new work priorities, new work ways of working, all of that had to be done. And it was done through crisis management. And it just really shows, when the automotives are in a crisis, how quickly they can respond and adapt.
Yeah. I remember some of those discussions and participated in several of them around the idea, for example, of adapting health and safety best practices and protocols across, the manufacturing sector to, help ensure that we had a coordinated restart. There was a sort of, and this will get us into a little bit of a conversation with Chris, I think, as well. There was also a need to make sure that I think the industry was well coordinated with government in terms of how we see manufacturing, vehicle service as essential. Or certainly as important for a coordinated restart across various states that had different rules and different approaches to the initial stages of the pandemic. So that seemed to be an important aspect of the successful restart, was a coordination with the CDC and local and regional health authorities, as well as governments, to ensure that that those supply chains and that manufacturing process was able to restart. Chris, what was, in the sort of, if we go back to the beginning of the government response during that period of time, there was a lot of focus right at the beginning, both through Congress as well as the Fed and Treasury, to respond quickly take us through a little bit of what happened there and what you think that has meant for the U.S. economic recovery so far.
Yeah, well, I mean, thanks so much for the invitation to join you all. Right, I mean, between late February and middle April, the Congress injected, almost $3 trillion into the economy. The Fed is buying, corporate debt. It's really unprecedented on both a fiscal and monetary policy side, unprecedented in size, scope, and speed. I think, unfortunately, for the economy, that has largely created sort of this K-shaped economy that my panelists were spot on regarding. And so now, right, we're left with, okay, is Congress going to do a fifth package, a so-called phase 4 package? Because you do have a number of expiring pandemic unemployment programs. You have the threat of a government shutdown. We think they will get a package done sort of in the $900 billion range, but the outstanding items are what Congress has been bickering over since April. It's, a liability shield, state aid, unemployment, and then direct stimulus checks.
And so you think, though, that something will get done before some of those essential government programs expire?
Yeah, so December 31 is the statutory deadline for call it 14 million people, largely gig workers, but also self-employed workers and others who, for the first time under the CARES Act in March, can qualify for state unemployment benefits. So those final checks go out December 26th. So whether or not Congress gets something done sort of in the next 24 hours, they may be back next week or even the week after Christmas. But yes, between the omnibus and the phase 4 package, it does seem like something is likely, and they're very, very close, but it's Congress, so it's never 100%.
Right. So let's stay with this K-shaped recovery idea. So Michelle, when 2019 wrapped up, the U.S. auto industry sold roughly 16.8 million cars and light trucks, as I recall, which
17,
is
rounded up to 17. Yeah.
Okay, let's call it 17. I like that number. That's way up there, right? It's not a record, but it's close. Then we had this big trough that you talked about, this demand shock and this supply shock. Where do you think the industry is going to land at the end of 2020? And given your view of a K-shaped recovery and Chris's commentary on that, where do you think 2021 goes? What's your forecast for 2021?
So we think that this 2020 will close out at 14.3 million compared to 17 million last year. We do think next year will be a lot better. One of the things that I think people forget about too, the other thing that didn't happen this year is fleet sales were decimated. Businesses didn't order vehicles. The rental car business was disastrous. We think some of that will start coming back. And in fact, we think there will be some pent up demand as we come out of this. So we're on the conservative side. We're at 15.3 million for next year, but certainly not back to the 17 million of 2019.
Yeah. So okay, so that's still below 17 million units, fairly substantially.
It's still pretty healthy.
Would you? Very much so.
You and I remember the days when 15 million, 16 million was really good.
Yes. Let's Michelle, let's not age each other here. I feel now you're calling me out. I think you're right. I do remember that. But will we get back to 17 million units anytime soon in your view? Is it 2022, 23? What can you look out?
We don't go that far out on our forecasting, but
okay.
I think there's a consensus that it's certainly middle part of the decade, maybe 2024, 25. It'll be a few years. Because we have a lot of ground to make up.
Yeah, and Carla and Chris, more broadly across the economy, what's your view of the economy for 2021 and then into 2022?
Yeah, there's I call it a big sensitivity analysis study, because there are so many parameters. If it goes one way or the other, it's gonna make a difference in the automotive industry. I mean, first and foremost is how quickly we can get the vaccine rolled out. So we have a healthy workforce, we have a healthy society, and things can reopen and the economic recovery can begin. So the sooner that happens, the more optimistic we are in terms of rebounding. Now, the other aspect is, the work from home status. Vehicle miles traveled are down. We don't expect them to come back until maybe 2022. And in some cases, they may never come back, depending on what part of the world you're in and how your company reacts to work from home. So all of these come back and have a role to play. There's also the other side of the coin. People can actually, if they're remote working, they can live anywhere. And we're seeing a large part of the population starting to move out into the middle of nowhere instead of going into the city. So all these things are happening. Our data shows that, we expect to see the numbers back up around 2023. But again, it depends which way some of these situations happen and are remedied.
Yeah. And Chris, I would imagine taking the macro view more broadly, Carla's comment about the vaccine is a critical sort of question, right? How quickly and how broadly? Yeah.
For sure. I mean, and not just in the US, right? I mean, most of London is going back into lockdown in the next 24 hours. So I think, the vaccine across the board. And, I think the other two big wild cards, just from a Washington standpoint, the first is that phase 4 package. How big is it? Can we at least, spray some foam on the runway by year end as we go into, what is likely to be a pretty grim couple of months on the COVID front. And then, I don't think it's really hard to overstate how big a deal the January 5th Georgia Senate runoffs are. That largely will dictate fiscal and tax policy for the next 2 years. If Democrats can sweep and pick up both seats, on the plus side, you have that sort of $3 trillion Build Back Better plan that President-elect Biden has articulated. But, the downside is that comes along with the potential for $4 trillion in tax increases. If the Republicans hold just one of those seats, the risk of tax increases is off the table, but your fiscal spend is probably capped around $1 trillion.
And so would you hazard a prediction as to the outcome in Georgia?
I think it's well, first of all, I think anyone who has a lot of conviction on election outcomes and polling right now is you're more confident than I. I think they're extremely close. I think, anyone who has a model who can predict what's going to happen in a pandemic in January with the fate of the Senate. I mean, there's no historic analog for this. You can't, it's not like a county commissioner runoff or something like that. This is just massively significant with sort of the cabinet and tax policy and the entire judicial branch sort of hanging in the balance. So I think it's much closer to a jump ball, whereas I think consensus is probably closer to like a 70 or 75% chance that the Republicans pick up at least one with Perdue, the stronger candidate than Loeffler.
Right. So let me shift gears now back into the auto market a little bit more deeply. Michelle, what are customers buying today?
Pickup trucks and SUVs. Anything under $30,000 is not selling very well because that is the part of the market that's been decimated by the pandemic and was hurting before that. And automakers have pulled out of that market. So there isn't as much choice for consumers there anyway.
Right. But when you say pickup trucks and SUVs, I mean, let's talk a little bit about what those segments are, right? So, it's a pretty broad spectrum of vehicles from compact car-like SUVs to big pickup trucks, correct?
Right. So let's start with the big ones. Pickup trucks, I think they're about 15% of the market right now. We've not seen that in a long time. It's usually, more like 12. Compact SUVs are still the number one segment, but we are seeing a big surge in the mid-size part of the market. Part of it has to do with new product being introduced. So it's kind of across the spectrum. And then cars are weak. Car sales are weak.
And so I'm looking at this market, and that's been a long-term trend. Wouldn't you agree that
yes, and it accelerated.
Yeah, and it's accelerated, right? So maybe what, 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10? What do you think the percentage of truck buyers to car buyers is?
Well, the car part of the segment it's under 25% now. Imagine
Yeah.
that. I mean, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was 70% of the market. Now it's down to under 25% of the market.
Right. And so we're looking at that. And at the very same time, we see enormous investments by suppliers and tech companies and auto manufacturers in a future that looks different, a future that's much more electrified, a future that's more automated. And I was taken by your point about COVID and Mark's comments about COVID earlier. It's interesting. We saw not only sort of the manufacturer, as Carla mentioned, of critical medical equipment and PPE, but we also saw self-driving car companies demonstrating how contactless deliveries can be done with that technology. So, you can start to see the future developing and more electric vehicles into the marketplace, but there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect right now between that investment and what consumers are buying today. How do we bridge that?
So I always say you can't make people buy what they don't want. So we have to fix the want part. And when we look at what's happening on a global scale, it's clear the automakers need to have electrified vehicles in their portfolio, and a lot of them. And we see with the Biden administration, at least what's being said is we expect to see CAFE increase again, more investment in green energy, more investment in infrastructure, and all of that bodes well when we think about the reasons why people are hesitant to buy an electric vehicle today. It's not just price, but it's infrastructure, it's trust in the technology. A lot of education needs to be done on the consumer side. And putting an electrified powertrain in a vehicle that most people consider to be standard, let's say a pickup truck or a sports car, it gets rid of the illusion that these vehicles won't fit my lifestyle, that they're just, small little boxes that'll maybe get me around town. No, these are workhorses. These are fun to drive. These are really fun driving machines. And that will help with the impression to the consumer. But education, we have to be thinking about incentivizing to be able to bring that monetary equation down. We have to be talking about total cost of ownership versus just purchase price. American consumers don't tend to do that. And if you really look at that, it works for any form of electrification, for hybridization all the way to pure battery electric. So all of those different elements need to be done. We've seen communities in the US that have created open houses or test drives for electric vehicles at certain companies. And we've seen that it actually shift the minds of people once they get in and experience what that vehicle is like and how it might fit better into their everyday lifestyle.
Yeah, it's interesting, this idea of, we talk a lot about cost, but you're almost talking about a convenience parity idea that I can do what I want to do in that type of vehicle. It is exciting to see, by the way, just as a gearhead like me, to see pickup trucks electrified, to see high-end sports cars electrified, as well as CUVs. I think we are seeing product coming into the marketplace in all the segments that Michelle described as well.
And when we think about a pickup truck and the workhorse and how they're utilized in the construction industry, et cetera, typically they're just driven and they sit. And to be able to then provide supplemental power to the contractors, I think we'll see a lot of the electric pickups go first into these kinds of commercial type businesses and delivery services, clearly.
Yeah, you mentioned things like incentives and infrastructure. We've been focused a lot on where the opportunity is for collaboration, with policymakers. And in fact, we've just released an auto innovation agenda that outlines some of the things that you've talked about. Certainly on the demand side, the more charging infrastructure and hydrogen fueling infrastructure for hydrogen electric drive vehicles, for example. Chris, you mentioned a minute ago, in your commentary about Georgia, that could have a lot to say about what the president might be able to do with regard to his agenda. We noted, for example, with interest that he proposes somewhere around 500,000 or 550,000 charging stations across the country for EV adoption. So how does he do that in a divided Congress scenario? What are the opportunities to have that type of a policy idea have broad acceptance across both sides of the aisle and both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue?
I mean, if he doesn't have control of the Senate, it's a whole lot harder. Areas, when you think about all the various fiscal phases that have happened this year, I think it's important to note that policymakers think of those as disaster relief. We haven't yet gotten into the stimulus component, which is, phase 5, which is Biden's, Build Back Better plan, which really has sort of your industry and kind of green infrastructure, at the crossroads. No, maybe pun intended. I don't know. But, areas where he can, do it unilaterally without Congress, really not, there's not much. You do have a highway bill expiration at the end of next year. And you do have people like John Kerry coming back to be the international climate czar. Apparently the domestic climate czar will be announced later this week. A lot of speculation that maybe it's Gina McCarthy, formerly of the EPA, joining Paris Climate on day one. I think and sort of being creative in using the US government's balance sheet to try to, really push climate, whether it's through the military or through, Buy America provisions and others. But without the Senate, it's a whole lot harder, no question.
Yeah. And just so we have context, Michelle, we're talking about, this shift to EVs. I want to get into automated vehicles in a second, but in this transformation to EVs, right now, what's the rough percentage of the new vehicle market that is zero emission vehicle related?
About 2%. So we have a ways to go. There's lots of room for improvement.
Yeah.
It gets, as I always say, it gets a lot more publicity than it actually does sales.
Right. But that brings in, some of the ideas that Chris referenced and Carla, you mentioned a moment ago. I want to go back to the production side of it for a second, though, Carla. We have an industrial base and a supply chain that is geared toward internal combustion engines. What does it take to shift the workforce and to shift the supply chain? Do we need to think differently about the production side as well as the demand side?
We absolutely must, and we have to start well before the big transition happens. When you talk about an electric vehicle, there's much fewer parts, fewer moving parts. So the whole bill of materials shrinks, and that affects clearly the supply chain. It affects the workers and how they are aligned on the assembly line. It impacts the different types of engineers that you need to be able to design and then design the manufacturing for this. It impacts a lot of suppliers that are today providing internal combustion engines, internal combustion engine componentry, exhaust componentry. Everyone becomes impacted. And that means there is going to be an impact to workforce, no doubt. There are going to be some plants that probably will be shuttered, either that or they'll be transformed into something else. So as an industry, when we look at our total employment, we need to be looking at the hourly and the salary side. What skills do we need in the technician side? What skills do we need in the engineering side? And begin to think about how we can take our current workforce, do some reskilling, upskilling now so that they can make that transition. And, in these days of ever, very fast-paced technological growth, everybody has to be doing this. I don't care if you have a PhD, if you're not continually learning, you're going to be passé very, very quickly when we're moving so fast in technology. So really taking a look at what your workforce is today, where it looks like it's going to be needed in the future, and start that preparation now. It's got to start happening. We're already seeing as plants are changing from a new product to another new product, even if it's internal combustion engine, the level of automation is going way up. And this isn't going to change. And that already is having an impact on the workforce. And we need to be thinking, okay, even automation alone, as we move into industry X, what do we need to bring along the workforce? How can we do that training? And we talked a little bit earlier about how the industry starting, working with government a lot throughout this crisis. I think we've seen the triple helix start we've often talked about the triple helix, where industry, academia, and government work together to solve some of these issues. Now it's happening, and now it needs to continue and happen more than ever. Those conversations need to happen, that workforce and a way to enable that with tuitions, with, supplanting, how to pay for it as we train the workforce of tomorrow. And then how to really think about where are we going to build those skateboards? Those electric powertrain skateboards are the key to sustainability in the electric vehicle world. We need to be making those here. So the supply chains for batteries need to be studied. We need to be looking at how we can get those raw materials and how we can manufacture and mine those here and bring that onto our shores. That's one way definitely to help with this transition and with the workforce.
Yeah, fascinating.
That was one of my concerns, and we talked about it earlier. We have to build different kind of supply chain, and frankly, we're behind. I mean, China is dominating the battery market. Europe is very intentionally building a battery market. And where do those minerals come from? Sometimes not very nice places, and we need to think about how they are obtained, because it's not particularly ethical ways that some of those minerals are mined. So I think that's another aspect of the supply chain that we have to think about.
Yeah, and it sounds like, it's about the global competitiveness of the U.S. auto industry, but it also sounds like it's also a bit of a broader consideration with regard to the economic security of the nation. And so, Chris, let me pull you in a little bit, because some of these themes, affect how we think about innovation policy and trade policy in the United States. It seems to me that the future of the auto industry is not only in building new vehicles for this market, but also the opportunity to export around the world. So we have access to minerals and supply chains that are important, but also the opportunity to export new technologies. How do you see the sort of import-export sort of policy dynamic changing or not over the next few years?
Right, the Vandelay Industries. With President-elect Biden, right, on the plus side, the risk of Section 232 tariffs on autos and auto parts goes to zero. I don't think the Section 301 tariffs on China are going anywhere soon, though. The idea of a trade war with Europe is eliminated overnight, so you have a positive there. I do think you'll see much better coordination in the tech war against China, right? I think one of the stories of the last 4 years is sort of the talk of a trade war with China masked the underlying reality, which was that it was and continues to be and probably escalating into be more of a tech war with export controls, with greater use of the entity list, et cetera. So I think the narrative with the US and China will continue to deteriorate, but it's going to be a lot more linear. You don't have to worry about sort of being whipsawed on, a personal request, a la ZTE with Chairman Xi and a President Biden. The idea of USMCA continues, right? This is, the idea that sort of globalization is being replaced by kind of super regionalization, I think, is something that has a lot of resonance within the Democratic Party, particularly among labor unions. I suspect you'll also see in a Phase 5 package sort of an idea of incentivizing and onshoring supply chains back into the U.S. But yeah, a lot of the rare earth I mean, that's never coming back. I mean, that's just the reality of it.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack in that, and opportunity and risk as we think about it. Just a last kind of viewpoint, and then I want to shift into perceptions about the industry as we start to move toward the close. We're looking at this transformation again. We talked about EVs. Let's talk a bit about AVs. There's so much advanced and automated driver assist systems coming into the marketplace now. Michelle, are customers aware of these safety technologies and how they work? And is there an opportunity for us to build on that growing awareness as we start to talk about more highly automated vehicles coming into the fleet?
Absolutely. We have seen a lot of skepticism around autonomous vehicles, except in, say, luxury cars where people have driver assist systems. They get it. They've experienced it. They know how it works. They're more comfortable with how it works, and they have a far better feeling about autonomous vehicles. I do think that one of the things I think has happened through the pandemic is how the commercial use or the business case around autonomous vehicles has been a little more solidified in terms of they'll be in commercial fleets. We saw them, doing more deliveries, and I think that certainly will accelerate. So it's not going to be like every consumer has one anytime soon or has access to anyone at time soon. It'll be more business, and that should get people more comfortable as well.
Right. So you see two channels here, or two paths forward, right? One, more automated driver assist systems across a growing portion of the fleet, while at the same time, key use cases for highly automated vehicles. It might be personal delivery, it might be package delivery. That's how you see these developments going forward into the marketplace.
Right. And I think that will make that much more palatable to consumers as they gain confidence. We're expecting a lot of consumers, the switch to EVs, the switch to AVs. It's going to take all hands on deck to educate people and give them experiences with the new technologies, and getting them comfortable and confident.
Right, but there's a benefit to these technologies, right? I mean, there's a benefit with regard to reduced emissions, increased safety, right? So it would seem that there is an alignment between this investment and our policy goals in those areas. Yes.
But it has to be well communicated and made clear to the consumer that there is that benefit, because right now I'm not sure it's totally there.
Right. It's a fair point. And I think everybody has a responsibility in that, right? Whether it's government safety agencies, manufacturers, how manufacturers and
dealers, media, you name it. It's all of us in the business need to be educating people about it.
Yeah, fascinating. Go ahead, Carla, please.
May I just add on to that? I think ADAS systems are great, and they've been shown to help with preventing fatalities, preventing accidents, preventing near misses. However, we don't have good clarity in the definitions and in how each of the manufacturers is actually developing those systems. So you go from one car to the other, it has a different name. I think there was a report published with the 60 some odd names for the different kinds of devices. We need to have some common languages. We need to have some common parameters. If you go from one vehicle to another, you shouldn't be scared by the way a certain system works, because it's not like the other car that you were in. So I do think we need to have better discussions about that and come to some harmonization, because that will help people accept. And knowing that this is happening with the ADAS systems, we should be thinking about that in advance when we talk about autonomy, even connectivity, and how we can have that common language when we're talking to consumers, that we're all speaking the same kind of language and with the same expectation.
Great. So, we've talked about a very complex industry with a lot of moving pieces. I'm going to start with you, Michelle. I want you to imagine that you are talking to a key policymaker. And I'd like you to convey to this policymaker what you think the most important aspect of this industry is that this policymaker may not know. what is it about this industry that's really important for policymakers to understand? It could be one thing. It could be, about the marketplace itself, and what the realities of the customer is today. It could be something about sort of where we're going in the future. But what do you think the one nugget is that a policymaker should understand about the industry from your perspective?
Well, I think that Carla said it very early in the discussion. It's an extremely complex industry and it's global, but at the same time, it's very personal. So I think policymakers need to focus on, what's best for the consumer too, because ultimately they will decide where we go.
Yeah, fascinating. Carla?
Yeah, I think they have to really understand. I think most of them do, but what a great economic engine it is and how technologically developed it is. And because of the technologies that are coming from auto, it can help us with a number of mobility solutions that can help with our healthcare situation, can help with our employment. It gives those ladders of opportunities for education. This is what the industry is providing. So not just the economic side, but the societal benefits, because it's so technologically advanced, and how that can be shared even amongst other industries, aerospace, mining, agriculture, all these things that need to have lighter weight products running on electrified systems, so that we can get more food out of the ground. All of this is coming together in an ecosystem, and the automotives often lead that technology.
All right, Chris, I'm going to switch it up on you. So I'm going to ask you the question in reverse. So what would a policymaker want to convey about our current political reality that would be important for the industry to understand as we're coming into this new political moment, this new set of policy opportunities, and at the same time in a transformative moment for the industry?
I mean, politicians, I think, are always kind of, they're not exactly innovative leaders, right? They're sort of, technology disrupts politics too. I suspect, right? I mean, you look at all the 50 states. I'm not 100% on this, but I'm pretty close that the top two jobs in every state are truck driving and cashiers or retail, right? And so if I'm a politician, I'm probably concerned that, both of those positions are going to be eliminated by a machine. So I think, messaging around that, how this, is you're right. I mean, this is, coal, steam, oil, right? This is the next, right? This is the second great industrial revolution, or however you want to phrase it. But there is going to be reticence about that, I suspect, particularly on the job and societal aspects of it.
Yeah, and at the same time, when you look at the U.S. auto industry broadly, you're talking about 10 million Americans who rely in one way or another on this industry for their livelihood. And you're talking about roughly a little bit less than 6% of GDP, right? So there's an enormous economic engine that still drives a major portion of the economy. And I think you make a good point. We have to be thoughtful about this transformation in a way that we're talking not only about the benefits in terms of emissions and the benefits in terms of safety, but the benefits in terms of American economic life, the ability to continue to employ 10 million Americans and to transform, as Carla said, as we do so. And the ability, as Michelle said, to continue to satisfy customers as they continue to consume and value personal mobility. So it's, there is a really interesting sort of creative tension as we go through this period. Let me turn to you each now for a couple of final thoughts as we begin to wrap up. How can the U.S. really remain competitive with regard to the development and the adoption of these types of technologies? What are the and it could be an innovation answer, or it could be a policy answer. But if competitiveness, global competitiveness, is the imperative here, what do we need to do to remain competitive as we innovate in these technology areas? Let me start with you, Carla.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important that the technology has to come from here. We're already behind in batteries. We can't let that happen with any of the other technologies. The way we do that is by retaining good researchers. We've lost a number of our researchers in our high academic institutions to countries that are funding their research. We need to start funding that research here. We need to develop those innovations here and then implement those throughout the product. The technological leadership needs to be here.
Carla, thank you. Michelle?
Well, Carla said it best. It's about the people that are developing it. It's about the political will to be a leader. It's going to take a concerted effort by multiple parties to move us in that direction, and that is not easy.
Yes. Chris, the last word goes to you.
I mean, Carla nailed it. More H-1B visas have and create an environment in the U.S. where people want to come and study at the best schools and stay and kind of buy into the American dream and prevent companies from stealing our IP as well, right? That's a huge component to all of this. That's what the Section 301 against China began with, right? This wasn't about soybeans. This was about the theft of U.S. corporate technology. So, I think you'll continue to see that and just, fostering, the best and the brightest.
Great. Well, look, I want to thank all of you, Carla, Michelle, Chris, for a really engaging and excellent discussion on the auto industry landscape. And I hope we can do it again soon. I'd like to turn now to our association's incoming board chair for 2021, Chris Reynolds. And before I introduce him formally, let me just remind our viewers that our auto innovation agenda is available at autoinnovators.org. You'll be receiving it if you've logged on to this conference. And please give us your questions and comments about it. And we look forward to a robust partnership as we go forward. So with that, let me bring on Chris Reynolds. Chris is the Chief Administrative Officer of Corporate Resources at Toyota North America and is the incoming chair of Auto Innovators starting in 2021. I'm delighted to welcome Chris Reynolds. Chris.
John, thank you so much for leading that discussion with an incredible panel. I really enjoyed the insights from Carla, Michelle, and Chris. And thanks to each one of you, you shed some light on not only the current market dynamics, but also the amount of work and substantial investment that goes into producing a vehicle before a new car or truck rolls off the assembly line. And that's so much more important as we head into the future. That investment will only increase as we go. As John said, my name is Chris Reynolds. And in addition to being the Chief Administrative Officer for Corporate Resources for Toyota Motor North America, I also have the honor and great privilege of working with Auto Innovators and folks like Mark Royce at General Motors, who I'll have the tough job of succeeding as the next chairman for the Alliance for Automotive Innovation in just a few weeks. Now, after the formation of Auto Innovators in January and an incredibly dynamic year for all of us, I really look forward to building on the strong leadership that Mark forged for our expanding association, particularly as we go into what looks like will be a very interesting and exciting 2021. Today's webinar is a great way to help provide a new medium to expand the understanding of key issues impacting the auto sector, especially after the November election, which has brought about a number of changes at the state and federal level. Given those changes, let me, on behalf of the Alliance, congratulate President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris, because as we look to 2021, our industry's focus has to be working with the President-elect and his administration and both sides of the aisle. We can together achieve the shared mission of achieving a cleaner, safer, and smarter auto future. That's our objective. From my perspective at Toyota, the future has never looked as bright when it comes to advances in safety, many of the things we talked about in today's panel, and our commitment to a lower carbon future. The cars, trucks, and sport utility vehicles that we offer today across the industry are technological marvels, and give us a glimpse into the future of what we believe our customers will be driving in the future. Through the Alliance of Automotive Innovation, we can speak as an industry with a clearer and unified voice on so many issues impacting the auto sector, not just including OEMs, but also suppliers and tech mobility companies. I'm also excited about the association's recent public release of the Autonomous Vehicle Roadmap, which outlines the path forward to help support autonomous vehicles here in the United States. And let's not forget the innovation agenda that can help support and strengthen the auto sector and the roughly 10 million jobs that are related to it here in the United States. This webinar that you saw today is the first in a series that Auto Innovators will hold over the coming months on key topics. We really hope you'll join us again to get more insights on how future state or federal initiatives could help or perhaps impede the industry's shared commitment to a cleaner, safer, and smarter transportation future. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and may I be the first to wish you on behalf of the Automotive Alliance a happy holidays. Thank you.